Let's start with North Korea. There's a lot in geopolitics. Let's start at least with North Korea here. What's realistic to expect out of this summit in Hanoi?
No more missile testing, at least for now. Some aspirations about denuclearization, which is a good thing, and maybe some aspirations about some U.S. Concessions that we might make having to do with training exercises or something like that. Hopefully not the reduction of troops in South Korea, but things of that kind. I doubt there will be anything even close to the Iran agreement, the vaunted Iran agreement, which Obama was able to strike and which Trump threw out last year, saying it wasn't adequate. But that at least was a serious containment regime with the IAEA on the ground, making sure Iran lived up to it, and the information is Iran did live up to it.
This is the second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un now. Out of the first, I think there was some general language, but it felt more like atmospherics than specifics. Can we expect some real specifics here? What do we need to have to make sure we're moving forward? Well,
this has to be more than that. Most people think that was a photo op. And again, the good news is, one, Trump is paying attention. I don't think Obama paid enough attention to North Korea. And two, there's no testing, active testing now. But all of our intelligence folks think that North Korea is still developing its nuclear program, which is way more developed than Iran's was. So there needs to be more specifics. Some speculate maybe North Korea will destroy the Yongbyon facility, the most visible facility, but they have redundant facilities. So that is not denuclearization. And one more thing, David, China's working with North Korea on this. China wants containment. It doesn't want denuclearization and North Korea as part of South Korea. And we're dealing with China on the trade agreement. So there's some linkage here. We want something from China.
What we've just been watching here is Air Force One taking over from Joint Base Andrews in Washington as he wends his way over to Hanoi. Let me pick up on something you said, which is that perhaps President Obama didn't pay enough attention to it. President Trump has been pretty assertive about this.
Yeah.
And he's tweeted, for example, so funny to watch people who have failed for years, they get nothing, telling me how to negotiate with North Korea, but thanks anyway. Does he sort of have a point?
He sort of has a point. I mean, Obama, to be fair, was paying more attention to Iran. He struck a deal. It was not a perfect deal. But most people, certainly I, think the better move forward was to make it a better deal. And I think he would have had a lot of support from Europe, where now he has no support when Vice President Pence is asking Europe to withdraw its support for the deal. It also denies us regular access to China and Russia, who were also parties to the Iran deal.
You mentioned China, and China for many, many years we've all believed is the pathway to get to Pyongyang, frankly, that they could assert pressure on North Korea that we couldn't directly. What is the role they're playing, and how does our dispute over trade factor into that? Is that helping? Is that hurting? How complex is this?
Well, it's interesting. The scholars at the Wilson Center think that China and North Korea are not especially close if you study the history, but they are immediate neighbors, and they share a long border, and North Korean defectors by large numbers have been going into China. And oh, by the way, secret, China's been trading with North Korea while saying it's abiding by our sanctions. So China doesn't want an imploded North Korea. China's working with North Korea to strike a deal that's good for China. That factors into this trade negotiation that's ongoing. That's a good thing. The markets will stay strong or go up. That's good for Trump if he strikes a deal. What needs to be in that deal? There needs to be language about intellectual property. Our companies cannot be required to give up their IP to do business with China. And also, it's unreasonable to think that China can continue to steal from us intellectual property secrets. So if that changes, then there's a basis for a deal that Obama did not strike. And that is, a win for Trump, and probably will keep the markets high.
Whether it's North Korea or whether it's China trade, many people think this is going to take some time. It's not going to be resolved right away. Let's talk about something that doesn't feel like it can wait that long, and that's Venezuela. And we saw it over the weekend with the violence down there as they tried to bring in aid and food to the people, the poor people down in Venezuela. We have Vice President Mike Pence going down right now to meet with the Lima Group. How is this going to be resolved? What is the right path forward for the United States?
Well, most people think, and I would agree, that the Maduro government has been dreadful for Venezuela. That does not mean that there should be a U.S. invasion, ground invasion, tomorrow. And I don't think our allies on this, the Lima Group, the group of South American nations except for Mexico, that supports a new leader, or the EU, would be willing to contribute to any kind of ground force. So we better think long and hard before we threaten that. What would be great is if somehow, through magic and sustained diplomacy, we strike a deal, which would open up the borders first to feed the starving folks, and then work out a political transition. That would be ideal. I would just point out, though, you know, borders have been closed in Yemen and from time to time in Syria, the borders have been weaponized against humanitarian aid, and I wish the U.S. would speak out more on those things, too.
Well, and you raised Syria, and give us some hope here, because it wasn't that long ago that everybody thought that Assad was on his way out. He'd be gone. There'd be a deal, and it doesn't look that way now at all. He's established. How can we make sure that Venezuela doesn't turn into some version of Syria where this goes on and on and on with the enormous humanitarian cost within the country? Well,
Syria has tribalism in a way that Venezuela doesn't. You know, it doesn't have the Kurds, it doesn't have the Sunni-Shia conflict. It does have the overlay of geopolitics. Russia and China do not want the Maduro government to fall, or that's my sense. They certainly are not intervening. So it has that overlay. But it also, it seems to me, if we can get the whole neighborhood with us, is a simpler problem to solve. And I think the way to solve it is a transition to a more pluralistic democratic leadership.
As far as you can tell, is the Trump administration handling Venezuela the right way?
Well, Secretary of State Pompeo and Vice President Pence are both focused on it, and both Pence is down there now. I think Pompeo was there, maybe coming back, and he's paying a lot of attention. And so is the neighborhood. There's a huge refugee problem again, and a humanitarian catastrophe problem. So I would say basically yes. Does that mean it gets solved? Not necessarily. And it's not helpful, it seems to me, to have our neighbor Mexico and others in Latin America offended by some of the ways we're treating migrants who are coming up to the U.S. border.
So finally, Jane, you have a very special perch at the Wilson Center. You get to look at the world and assess it. Do some of our editorial work for us. As you look around the world, what's the one that bothers you the most?
Well, you know, it's a troubled world. It bothers me that governments are losing a lot of their pluralistic and humanitarian and hopeful aspects around the world, not just one government. That worries me. It worries me that the U.S. seems to be receding from many parts of the world. Our leadership matters. I don't mean our military leadership, though that's a component. I mean our shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan called it, leadership, are setting the example for the world and are helping build, not destroy, alliances of like-minded folks who hope for that for their own people. And when that goes, I think the world will be a drearier place, and I surely don't want that for my grandchildren.